Let's move again. So pharmacovigilance, and we have with us colleagues to present an update of the report on pharmacovigilance task from the EU member states and EMA from 2019 and 2022. And not surprisingly, they will discuss with us the report that has been recently published. And guess what about lessons that we learn from response to COVID-19. So it's my pleasure to introduce Aniello Santoro, Signal Management Lead of the Pharmacovigilance Office. And there is also Stephanie Cohen with us, and they will guide us through the report. Thank you, Aniello.
Thank you very much. So as it was said, I'm going to give you a brief introduction on the report, the multi-annual report on pharmacovigilance task of EU member states and the EMA. Before I delve into the content, I think a few words of background can be of help. So there is a legislative requirement on the Commission to prepare such a report, and we support the Commission with this obligation in preparing a technical report. There were a previous multi-annual report that started being producing with the implementation of the new at that time pharmacovigilance legislation. So the first one was for 3 years period starting from 2012, a second one for 4 years period from 2015, and the current one, which covers the period between 2019 and 2022. And as you can see, I'm quite glad to show that it has a bit of a different feel and layout thanks to the advance and the help of our graphic designer team. You can also find the reference below in case you want to have a more in-depth review of the document. How we worked at this report. So as per the title, we capture data on national pharmacovigilance activities, and these were collected directly from member states, but we also capture data on procedures, pharmacovigilance procedures that are centralized, and these were collected from internal function within the EMA. So example of the first one, the one at national level, for example, we cover initiatives that were run at national level as signaled by the member states, for example, awareness campaigns to promote reporting of adverse drug reaction, and also metrics of procedure that were dealt with nationally. From the point of view of the centralized data and procedure, we also cover metrics about procedure that were dealt with at central level. We gather also case study and example, and I will explain in a second what I mean by that. We compiled all the input received, and eventually we drafted the report. I think now we are in a good place to go a little bit more into the content. So here I just an eagle view of what is the main specificity of this report, what are the focus areas, and not surprisingly, considering that almost 3 out of the 4 years covered by this report were dominated by the pandemic and by our response to that, the first focus area is exactly that, the way we responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. Beyond COVID, we also cover activities around the measurement of the impact of pharmacovigilance activity, the effectiveness of those, the advances in the real-world evidence, and I believe this morning you have heard about Darwin and related topics, and in general, simplification of processes to gain efficiency and to divert resources where it matters more. The second part of the report is more the mainstays of pharmacovigilance, so it's a sort of a constant across the different multi-annual reports. So we had this part also in the previous one. So the activities, pharmacovigilance activity, that are led by the PRAC, which is the committee in charge of the safety of medicinal products. And these include, for example, the assessment of signals, of risk management plan, periodic safety update reports, and so on. But also other activities within the network, like the reporting of adverse drug reaction, and in this you have a direct role, the pharmacovigilance inspection, the coordination and international collaboration, and the capacity building. And the approach that we followed in covering this wealth of information is to provide a quantitative element in terms of statistic metrics behind, where applicable, of course, the different procedure. For example, how many signals were reviewed, were validated, were confirmed by the PRAC, what were the main outcomes, and so on. But also to provide the case story and the example that I had anticipated before. And with this, I mean concrete description, example of how the different components of the EU pharmacovigilance system worked in practice to protect public health. So, for example, taking the example of TTS, we sort of ran through the journey that led from the identification of this association with one vaccine, with Vaxzevria, and all that was done in order to minimize this risk. I will now move on in the second part of the presentation on the main messages of this report, like take-home messages, if you like. So the first one is about our response to the pandemic and the effectiveness of this response that was possible thanks to a variety of success factors. I would start with the timely reporting of adverse drug reaction to EUDRA-Vigilance, and as anticipated before, you have a direct role here, and actually this is a big thank you, because we noticed that there was a big amount of reporting of ICSR, individual case safety report, for vaccine, and these were reported by patients, were reported by healthcare professionals, and allowed us to have the information in the database so that we could review, we could analyze, we could raise signal when needed. So in terms of metrics, around 2 million individual case safety reports for COVID vaccine were sent to EUDRA-Vigilance in the EA, and these were instrumental for signal detection. A second success factor is the intensified monitoring and application method to harness unprecedented volume of data. I think we all know that during the pandemic, it was quite difficult to keep up with the proliferation of information, of data, studies, evidence, and of course it was important to try to use all of this and to keep a close eye on the vaccine. We achieve that through a near real-time monitoring of special event of interest for vaccine, the so-called adverse event of special interest, developing a tool into our data analysis system like dashboard that's supported with visualization, with description of side effect, and also refining tools that were better fitted for the monitoring of vaccine, like the deployment of observed versus expected analysis, that it's a bit of a mouthful word to say, to look at basically deviation in terms of more reports of a specific adverse drug reaction being received in a database than would be expected. And that is a sort of signal, something to look into. And the summary safety report 56 were evaluated by the PRAC in the reference period, which is until 2022. These were an additional requirement that was placed on marketing authorization holder of a COVID vaccine to report initially, immediately after authorization, every month on new evidence that was available for their vaccine, so that really we could keep a close eye on those and take action when needed. We also had the funding of independent studies that helped both in the preparedness phase that started before rolling out the first vaccine, but also throughout the pandemic. So 11 such studies were contracted out and 6 of them finalized during the reporting period. We had an enhanced collaboration within the EU, but also outside the EU with the international regulators, which was possible thanks to the existing confidentiality agreement, as well as through the setting up of specific ad hoc and time-limited agreement to allow, for example, regulators from other jurisdictions to intervene as observer to some selected meeting of the Committee for Safety and provide their input, their information when considered beneficial. We had also an enhanced level of transparency, of communication, of engagement to a level that probably was unprecedented, and this translated into publication of the full risk management plan for vaccine and therapeutics, in publishing more than 50 safety updates for vaccine, which were very important documents to inform the public about new adverse drug reaction, for example, found to be associated with those vaccines, as well on recommendation for measures to be taken to minimize risk. We had over 30 press briefings, initially even with a fortnightly frequency, to respond to the need for information of media, for public stakeholder meeting, development info card to promote awareness on the importance of reporting side effects, and also provision of health advice. But all of this wouldn't have been possible without probably, I would say, a key success factor, which was the flexibility, the dedication, and the commitment of the EU network and all the stakeholders involved that went far beyond their immediate duties, and we can really say that ran the extra mile. So we had extraordinary meetings of the committees to address specific safety topics as they emerge, extraordinary releases of the terminologies that is used to describe side effect, MedRA, but also in general prioritization and acceleration of procedure to the maximum level possible in order to respond as effectively and promptly possibly to emerging new evidence. I promised I would give you also an example of actually a case story, and I thought that the best example maybe to run you through and show how we documented that into the report is the one with thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome that was found out to be associated to Vaxzevria. And this example is meant to illustrate how the different components of the system really interplayed to minimize this risk. So we had the first cases of unusual blood clots that were found out quite soon after authorization, about 5 weeks after that, and immediately a signal procedure was triggered after accelerated time, with accelerated timeline. Immediately, the Committee for Safety, the PRAC, started reviewing the issue, analyzing all the evidence available, and issued a preliminary recommendation on a possible link between this event and the vaccine. In order to get further insight of what we need to remember was at the time a new clinical entity with a very, very, let's say, short notice, an expert working group was convened with the expert from neurology, from cardiovascular, and so on. And also, this was possible thanks to the interface with healthcare professional organization. These were instrumental to provide know-how and knowledge that was fed into the assessment process of the PRAC, who was then in the position to issue a second PRAC recommendation where this important serious side effect was labeled. Throughout the assessment of this issue, we had unprecedented level of cooperation, coordination with other regulatory authorities, with academia, that allowed to generate and share rapidly evolving knowledge on these new clinical entities. We had independent real-world evidence studies that were commissioned, as well as marketing authorization holder concern was a request to set up some study to further assess this risk. Throughout all the assessment of this issue, we had regular and prompt communication and updates to the public with regular press briefing and communication. 11 were dedicated just to this issue. All of these elements allowed to confirm the overall positive benefit to risk of the vaccine in view of the rarity, although serious side effect, and the efficacy of the vaccine. But to better characterize the risk and the benefit of this vaccine across different age groups and a different level of infection rate, there was also a referral procedure to look more in depth into this aspect so that we could support better member state vaccination campaign. And last but not least, a workshop was organized when sufficient evidence of this new syndrome was accurate with new scientific evidence in order to discuss with scientists, among regulators, what had been understood on this syndrome, what was the pathophysiology, as well as possible mechanism, and also research topic for the future. The last slides, a couple of slides, are about other key messages in this report beyond COVID, because the report is about pharmacovigilance. So, of course, the safety of all medicine that are authorized in the EU and the activities to guarantee that. So, in this period, we could see a strengthening on the framework to measure the impact of pharmacovigilance activities, with a follow-up, more rigorous systematic follow-up on outcomes and evaluation of the need for further action, and greater engagement to help improve the implementation of risk minimization measure. And I think you're all familiar with the PRISMA pilot, that it's exactly a step in this direction to better understand enablers and obstacles to the implementation of risk minimization measure. The launch of Darwin EU, and I will not spend much time on that. You have heard about it this morning, but maybe to really just emphasize that this is what has been started last year, but the expectation is that by year 2025, this will have a phenomenal capacity to possibly conduct over 100 studies per year. So actually, this could be really something that would make a significant difference. Processes have been also simplified and automated to gain efficiency. For example, in the field of inspection, there were a transition to a hybrid model of remote and on-site inspection, and also the migration of pharmacovigilance inspection to an electronic platform, IRIS, that of course ensures better knowledge management, as well as reducing the risk of unintended release of information, and of course, better efficiency. This is just a list of the acronyms that I've used in this presentation, so that can help to decipher a little bit what was presented. And I will end up this presentation with a real thank you. Thank you for your contribution to pharmacovigilance throughout all this period, specifically throughout the pandemic, that took different shapes, with you reporting, as I said, the adverse drug reaction, which is essential for us to analyze, with you being part of the safety committee, of course, being represented there, and with you really capitalizing, using all the opportunities for engagement, for information, for communication that were put out there. You were really on top of the games throughout the pandemic, really informed at all stages. And thank you today also for paying attention to this presentation, and we'll be happy to take any question.